So I see you brought a horde of plague bearers. Very nice. I think I may have brought a counter. Hello and welcome to another Auspex Tactics unit review. Today we're continuing our look at the new Space Marine Codex and the new units and options that we have available to us. As you may have guessed by the picture at the start of the vid, we're looking at the Aggressor squad today. Now these were a unit that I really wanted to field as soon as they came out. They have the potential to do a hilarious amount of damage to hordes per model, but the issue was always trying to get them into a position where they could do that damage before being shot to death. In the new codex and the supplements, they've now gained a whole host of new options, which I believe have done enough to make this unit a really top tier competitive unit. In the fluff, the aggressors are the archetypal Gravis armoured unit for the new Primaris Marines, and they're deployed to fight the enemy in close confine engagements, particularly against enemy troops. I think that from Games Workshop's point of view, they are sort of a similar unit to Terminators for the new Primaris Marines. I don't know whether we'll get actual Primaris Terminators at some point. I suspect we might, but in the meantime these guys fulfill a very similar role. As I said before, I think they struggled to fill that role in the old codex because they weren't tough enough and they didn't hit hard enough in close combat, but now very much both of those things have been rectified. So without further ado, let's get into the unit's stats and their lovely abilities. So Aggressor squads are elite choices for the Codex Space Marines, and they come in units of 3, and they have the option to buy another 3 aggressors to make a max unit of 6. They cost either 35 points a model when fielded with Flamestorm gauntlets, or they cost 37 points a model when they're equipped with Boltstorm gauntlets and their grenade launcher. They have a movement of 5, weapon skill 3 up, ballistic skill 3 up, strength 4, toughness 5, 3 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 7, and a 3 up save. The sergeant has a further extra attack, so he's attacks 4, and he's got an extra pip of leadership, so he's leadership 8. Now this is of course a significant buff compared with the previous codex, where they only had 2 wounds and 2 attacks. So for the same points cost, they have been handed an extra massive durability boost and a decent buff in close combat, particularly when you take into account shock assault, which they didn't have before. So now they've essentially gained double the amount of attacks. An old aggressor squad would have been having 2 attacks when they charged, now they will be having 4 attacks. They have 2 war gear options, either Flamestorm gauntlets, or they can switch these out for auto Boltstorm gauntlets and a grenade launcher. If you take the Boltstorm gauntlets, you have to take the grenade launcher as well, but you really want to anyway, in my opinion. Auto Boltstorm gauntlets are Assault 6, 18-inch range weapons with a strength of 4 and damage of 1 and no AP. And the Fragstorm grenade launcher is also 18 inches, it's Assault D6, so it's a random number of shots, strength 4, 1 damage and no AP. This means an average of 9.5 shots per guy, which is often doubled in certain circumstances. More on that in a second. The Flamestorm gauntlets when shooting have a range of 8, Assault 2d6, strength 4, damage 1, no AP, and as with most flamer weapons they auto hit the target. So with these you can expect an average of 7 auto hits on the target. Both the Auto Boltstorm gauntlets and the Flamestorm gauntlets have a built-in Power Fist, so that's a strength times 2, AP minus 3, damage D3 weapon, which suffers a -1 to hit when it's attacking enemy units in the fight phase. So typically your aggressors are going to be strength 8, with 4 of those attacks on the first round of combat, and 5 for the sergeant. Ouch. They have the Angels of Death special rule, which, as I mentioned before, gives them the shock assault. They have Bolter Discipline, which doesn't affect their assault bolter weapons, and Tactical Doctrine, which will give them an extra AP -1 when they're in Tactical Doctrine for all of their assault weapons. This is absolutely amazing, because going from AP 0 to AP -1 is a very nasty buff on such high rate of fire weapons, and essentially makes them pretty good at taking out damn near everything, including vehicles. They have the Combat Squad special rule, which allows you to divide a unit of 6 into 2 units of 3 at the start of the game. Typically I wouldn't bother doing this, If you're only running a few squads, you may as well run them individually, as that will give you more sergeants in total. There's no real reason not to do it if you're running big squads, unless you're planning on using some nice stratagems or buffs on the unit, but it would give up more kill points. Now the really good rule that aggressors have is their Firestorm ability. So when the unit has not moved in the same turn, when they come to make a shooting or overwatch attack, they can fire twice. So essentially, in normal circumstances, if you don't move your aggressors in your movement phase, then you can shoot them twice in your shooting phase. The way that the rule is worded actually means that they will always be able to fire overwatch twice in your opponent's turn, because of the use of the word turn actually applies to the opponent's turn. So even if they moved in your turn, if the opponent charges them in their turn, then they will still get to fire overwatch twice. The rule would have had to say battle round if they wanted the movement restriction to apply to the previous movement phase. It can also come up with certain stratagems, such as Auspex Scan, which lets them do an out-of-turn shooting attack, or when they die near a chapter ancient, to let them potentially shoot when they die. When this special rule is in effect, they are incredibly strong at shooting. For example, one aggressor will have on average 19 shots, so that is almost the same as a full 10-man tactical squad rapid-firing bolters at the enemy. Absolutely insane on a model that is less than a third of the price of said tactical squad. And finally, they have the Relentless Advance special rule, so if they advance in their movement phase, then they can ignore the ballistic skill penalty that advance would usually apply to their weapons. So if you advanced in the movement phase, then they still get to fire their Boltstorm gauntlets on full ballistic skill. Obviously this doesn't do anything for their flamers. This is a particularly useful rule as they only have movement 5 and quite a short range on their guns. This means that they can happily advance and get a lot closer towards the enemy a lot quicker, without suffering any loss of firepower. So overall, they're a really strong midfield unit that you'd want to start at the front of your deployment zone and just charge at the enemy in most circumstances. Now out of the options, I much prefer the Boltstorm and Grenade Launcher option compared with the Flamestorm option, even though it's a little more expensive. The reason why is that you get almost as many hits from the shooting of the Boltstorm and Fragstorm, and this gives you an extra 18-inch range, so they don't have to be literally right next to the enemy to be able to fire. I'd say this extra range and flexibility massively outweighs the Flamestorm's very, very slight increase in damage. Flamestorms do have a mild advantage in hitting everything very nicely in Overwatch, but the opponent can even mitigate this by just charging them out of 8-inch range, so they get no Overwatch whatsoever. In my opinion, just take the Boltstorm and Grenade Launcher, it's far, far better. Now let's move on to some of the combos and nasty tricks we can do with the Aggressor squads. First of all, let's talk about the different chapter tactics that will best help them. First and foremost is the Ultramarines tactic, mainly because of if you have a full Ultramarines army, then they get the boosted tactical doctrine, which will allow a unit move and shoot as if it was stationary. So this is just nuts on these guys because they can move their 5-inch move and then still double tap their weapons. Aggressor's main weakness is that they're quite short ranged, so the enemy might be able to step back a little bit further from them and not let them double tap their weapons or even get in range at all. So this is just absolutely brilliant for keeping their damage output on the high double tap mode. Being able to fall back and shoot is also a nice buff too, as you'll often prefer their Boltstorm weapons over their Power Fists. Next we have White Scars, who are useful as they can happily advance, still shoot their weapons, and then charge in for a bunch of nasty Power Fist attacks. And they have a stratagem that allows aggressors to outflank, which means they can set up off the board and ensure they get that first volley of Boltstorm fire in without having any losses to enemy fire before that. Next, Iron Hands is quite good, mainly because of the 6-up Feel No Pain, which is really good on elite multi-wound models, as say if you're being shot with a damage 3 weapon, you have quite a high likelihood of shrugging off 1 damage on a 6-up save. This increases their durability even further, which is very useful. Having a 5-up Overwatch and a strat to make the Overwatch even better is also amazing, because frankly very few people will want to charge against a 114 shot 6-man aggressor unit that hits on 5s, or maybe 4s if you feel like paying 1 CP. Raven Guard is another incredibly strong option, primarily because of the stratagems. The stealthy rule will help them survive a lot better when they're in cover, giving an extra -1 to hit on any infantry unit entirely within cover and outside 12 inches of the enemy. And also they have the stratagem to put them in reserve so they can drop in and rapid fire all their weapons. They also have a warlord trait that will allow your aggressor squad to start right up in the face of the enemy and potentially just double shoot from turn 1. And finally, either Crimson Fists or Imperial Fists are both brilliant, as they get an extra bolter hit on a hit roll of 6, so that's a flat 25% damage increase. I don't really need to say why that's strong. Really looking forward to finding out what else Imperial and Crimson Fists can do. Looking forward to that Codex. In terms of successor chapters, the Stealthy trait is particularly good, giving them a 2-up save even when in the open, and Bolter Fusiliers can be useful as it gives them reroll 1s to hit with bolt weapons, which their strongest weapons are. Now let's move on to synergy characters. Anything that buffs their shooting is very strong, as their shooting is strong, so captains and chapter masters and lieutenants all give lovely flat buffs to the unit's damage output, and they're all worth considering. Chaplains, particularly with the +1 to wound litany, can be particularly strong, as this is strongest when applied to vast amount of low strength weaponry fire, which these guys have. And my final pick is the chapter ancient, who can potentially let an aggressor shoot when it dies in the opponent's turn on a 4-up. This works amazingly with these guys because the enemy can't just move in well within 18 inches and then just kill the unit with shooting that they know they'll be able to do, because you might get horrific reprisals of surprisingly getting 19 bolter shots in the face. And this could be particularly strong if, say, an aggressor dies to shooting and then kills another enemy unit before it even gets to fire. That would be quite funny. Moving on to stratagems, they have some very nice options with this. Firstly, Gene-wrought Might in the fight phase, as their Primaris unit, and really the only incredibly strong Primaris combat unit at the moment, means that every hit roll of a 6 with their Power Fist will automatically wound the target. That can really increase their damage potential against heavy targets, say if they charge a knight for example. Similarly, Honour the Chapter, fighting again for 3 CP, when you've got a unit with potentially around 25 Power Fist attacks, that can be well worth considering, as 3 CP may be a small price to pay for almost certainly killing a strong enemy unit. Transhuman Physiology is worth considering if the enemy is about to target them with lots of heavy weapons, as it will only allow them to wound the aggressor unit on 4s. Even if the squad still dies, the enemy should still have to expend more firepower to take that unit out. And finally we have Auspex Scan, which is always great to keep in mind, because if an enemy unit comes in from reserve within 12 inches of this unit, then they can just let rip with an insane amount of bolter shots, which could end the threat of the unit coming in from reserve before it's even had the chance to do anything. So how would I play this unit on the tabletop? Firstly, just give them the Boltstorm, Gauntlets and Fragstorm. It's just better in almost all situations. Then if you have an option to have them start off the board, as Raven Guard or White Scars have the option to do with a stratagem, then I would consider doing this too. And if you have a transport vehicle such as a repulsor, then you could consider putting them in that as well for added protection. If none of those things are possible, then put them at the far front of your deployment zone, in cover, ideally out of line of sight, say behind a ruined wall or something like that. From there you'll want to advance towards the enemy to get in threat range, either moving and shooting or staying put to double fire. You have to think quite carefully about the movement of these guys, as either you can stay still for double shots if you are in range, move normally to allow you to shoot and then have the potential of charging, or you can advance them, which can get them a lot more maneuverability, but unless you're White Scars, will stop you from charging. So you need to think about this unit's movement in the movement phase before you've done any shooting. I believe Ultramarines have a stratagem that can put a unit in the tactical doctrine for a turn, so if you have a big 6-man aggressor unit, then you could potentially flip that to the tactical doctrine turn 1 to allow them to move and double tap and also get AP -1 on their guns. I would generally consider charging into combat with these guys where possible, as their power fists will do a lot of damage. But you do have to bear in mind it might be more useful to have the power to have Overwatch, and if you don't kill your targets, you might not be able to fire your Boltstorm Gauntlets next turn, which are by far the best part of the unit. As you advance up the board, I would try and keep in range of various character buffs, whichever you've decided to buy for them, and to try and remain in cover, as having a 2-up save against shooting is a lot better than having a 3-up save. In most matchups, I would expect the enemy to really want to shoot these quite early in the game, as they have such a potentially high damage output, and even though they have 3 wounds, they have a slightly lower durability than some other Space Marine units. In terms of potential counters to these guys, the easiest is probably shoot them to death as soon as possible, and try and remain outside of the 18-inch double tap range if you have the option to. If you're playing a very stand away type army, you might be able to just have your entire army outside of the aggressor's maximum threat range for their guns for the first turn before you can hopefully kill them in your first turn. On an army level, they will generally struggle to shoot down toughness 8 vehicles, but anything else should probably be scared of their shooting at least to some degree when they have the -1 AP in effect. Overall, I'd rate Aggressors incredibly competitive now the new Space Marine Codex has dropped, and they're certainly one to be thinking about fielding on the battlefield. I can really see Ultramarines just loving these guys, same with Raven Guards being able to keep them safe. To deliver all of that bolter fire to an annoying location is just a really powerful option. I really enjoy how these guys are so generalist now they have actually genuine scary close combat ability. I certainly can't wait to get mine on the tabletop. As always, if I've missed anything or got any rules wrong, then please comment down below. It's very helpful when you do this to improve my knowledge of the game and make sure I'm not misleading anyone. I've made a ton of other videos on the other new Primaris units, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics and check them out. I think the next videos I'll be looking at doing are on Intercessors, Inceptors, and reviews of the White Scars and Ultramarines codexes, although they might well be waiting till next week, as I don't have much time this week unfortunately. Thanks for listening, and hopefully I will see you guys in the next video.